Hi everyone, it's Aaron and welcome back to Ride XP. So, the Philippine Loop is finally done. And today I want to finally give you a comprehensive guide on how to do it yourself. And this is just part 1. In part 2, we'll cover gear, packing, and all of that stuff. And by the way, apologies to my Pinoy audience kasi hindi ako magtatagalog kasi 50% of this channel's audience is from abroad. And also, please pardon the ads as well because writing this guide was a big undertaking and I need to get some value back for my time. Anyway, with that, let's dive in. So, what is the Philippine Loop and how does it work? Well, it's basically just a ride, drive, bike, or even walk across the entire Philippines from top to bottom and back to form a complete loop. There is an official version organized by a company called Philippine Loop Adventure Tour Inc. and they're partnered with the Philippine Department of Tourism. The important thing you need to know is that you don't need to register with them if you want to do it on your own time. The advantage of DIY is it's your ride, your rules, no time limit checkpoints or any compliance, and you also don't need to pay the registration fee. So that begs the question, what is the benefit of joining the official Philippine Loop? Well, in my experience, two main things. One, the fun of fulfilling a mission with set rules externally and being part of the community. I found that the constraints, the rules of the Philippine Loop were a useful guide and structure for a newbie like me to tackle such a big trip. So to complete the official loop, you have to stitch together all of these checkpoints on the map, and you need to finish it within a specified number of days of riding or driving, depending on what kind of vehicle you use. So for motorcycles, the time limit is 30 riding days. For cars, it's 60. For bikes, 90, and for walking, I forget, but it's a lot. So we'll focus on the 30-day moto version since that's what I did. And note that you are not allowed to change vehicles or drivers in the middle of your Philippine Loop. So how do you track your progress? Well, basically, you get a Philippine Loop passport that you fill in from day to day. And note that this passport just has limited pages. If you extend beyond 2 weeks or so, you need to remember to photocopy blank pages before you fill up the rest. So what you do is at every checkpoint, you take selfies that show your face, your vehicle, and the location of your checkpoint. And you also need to be holding your Philippine Loop passport and to wear their branded gear that comes with your registration. You also need to take a picture of your odometer at the start and end of every riding day. This basically verifies that you traveled the distance from one point to the next, so it's hard to cheat basically. And then, you can also post your daily checkpoint and odometer photos on the official Facebook group. And you want also to include photos of any side trips, just to share what you've been seeing. When you are done traveling, you then have 30 days to compile a Philippine Loop album. It contains the required photos along with your gas, hotel, and ferry receipts. So you kind of get the picture where they want to make sure that you really traveled the whole distance, that you stayed in all these different places, you kind of contributed to the local economy, you took the ferries, etc. So a committee will review this, and when they're done, you're a certified Philippine Loop conqueror. As of this writing, they just released batch 3 for the year, which I'm surprised I'm not part of yet, so I'm still waiting for my certification. But as a bonus, there's an annual contest too for all certified Philippine Loopers for the best 3-minute video and the best Philippine Loop album. And these all have cash prizes. So that's what you get if you register. But basically the genius of these rules is that simply by following them, you'll find that by the end, you've ridden or driven across the whole country from north to south. Except for Palawan, which they must have excluded for being too far away. But basically, essentially, these rules give you a place to start to take on this big journey. And joining also makes you a part of a helpful community via the official Facebook group. You also get official gear, as I said. And in my experience, wearing the official gear is kind of a magnet for goodwill as you travel around the country. You know, it's a sign to locals, wherever you are, that you have good intentions. But here's the thing. You don't need to do the Philippine Loop in 30 straight calendar days. And this is what allows even people with limited time to complete the Philippine Loop. But first, let me explain how day counting actually works. When you're not moving forward on the loop, That is, if you're taking days to rest or to go on side trips, the meter doesn't move. So, for example, if you rode from Tacloban to Surigao, which includes the ferry, that's of course one riding day. And that's the typical scenario. Anytime you advance to the next checkpoint going north or south, that's a riding day. But what if, as many loopers do, you land in Surigao Port and then go straight to the ferry to Siargao? Tacloban to Siargao then is your one riding day. But once in Siargao, you could stay for days or weeks and ride as much as you want, and none of those would count as a riding day. You could even fly home from Siargao, then fly back and resume your ride, and that still wouldn't count. The meter still won't move. And your last passport entry would still be the ride from Tacloban. And moreover, any extra ferry crossings you do beyond the 6 required, such as this from Surigao to Siargao, would actually reward you with 2 extra riding days. Another example, we rode from Surigao to Bukidnon, 1 riding day. Then we had a rest day there, during which we rode our bikes just around the area. But since we ended the day at the same place, no closer to the next checkpoint, that wasn't counted. And then, when we ended our North Loop in Manila, we took almost 4 months off. And I obviously used my bike sometime during those 4 months for other trips. None of those days counted because I never advanced toward another checkpoint. I always went back home. I even flew from Cagayan de Oro to Manila during that break, and that didn't count. And the takeaway is just that you don't need to do this all in one go. You have actually a whole year from the start of your ride to complete the 30 riding days. You could start in January, take a break, then finish in November. I did 7 straight days in January and then 16 straight days in May. My original itinerary, if not for this cursed Iran war, was to do it in 3 segments, not just 2. First, it would have been the North Loop, then the ride to Mindanao and leave my bike there and fly home, then take a few weeks break and then fly back to Mindanao and finish the rest. And just that didn't happen because it became too expensive and time consuming. So I hope that clears up how riding days work. But I actually want to assure you that it's less about strict compliance and much more about intentions. So don't stress too much over that. Next, let's talk about how to register for the Philippine Loop. Anyone can join the Philippine Loop regardless of nationality. You just need a valid driver's license and a properly registered vehicle or a bicycle or walk. Foreigners can drive in the Philippines for up to 90 days if their license is in English. Longer than that, or if it's not in English, then you need to get an international driving permit. And I have also read that you can transfer your license to a Filipino license when the first 90 days are up. And one expat says that it's a quick process at the local LTO office that'll cost about 1,500 pesos or $25. Now, registration is honestly very manual. They could really use a website. So let me save you the effort of having to dig up all of this information from their Facebook group. I've linked below in the description to the page where you can download the loop mechanics and other important information. You do need a Facebook account and to use Viber for communication. So you have 2 choices on how to register. You can register online using their Google form, which I've also linked below. Or you can go in person to the Philippine Loop Adventure Tour office in Makati. Here's the Google Maps pin. Either way, you fill out a registration form first, and then you upload or present your driver's license and ORCR, your vehicle registration. And then you take a photo of the back and side of your vehicle and submit a 2x2-inch ID picture, both of which I just sent via Viber. And then you pay the registration fee of 3,400 pesos, that's $56, for yourself and for any passengers. You'll get your Loop passport, 2 Philippine Loop branded dry fit t-shirts, 2 waterproof stickers, a Loop ID, and a small paper map of the Philippines. I also got the optional vest for 600 pesos so I could have the Loop branding visible while still wearing my armored riding gear. If you registered online, after filling in the form, you then message Miss Jackie Ables. Yes, there's just one person manually replying, so be patient. You inform her that you've completed your Google form and she'll send you payment details. Send her your proof of payment along with the ID photo and then arrange to have your kit delivered to you by courier. And then to finally start the Philippine Loop clock, you must go to a gas station of your choice, logically one that's near where you live. Gas up and take note of your gas receipt number and the amount loaded. You'll then fill up the inner front cover of your passport with this information. Send it to Jackie on Viber, and in a few hours, she'll send you back your one-time starting code. You don't need to wait for her to reply before you start riding. Just send this picture and be on your way. You'll write your starting code in your passport once you receive it from her. Now let's talk about versions of the Philippine Loop. As far as I know, there are 3 official versions of the Philippine Loop. There's the standard one, which most people do. There's also the Religious Pilgrimage Edition, and now the new Ultimate Edition. This is almost twice the length because it's a true circumnavigation of the country. It's a massive project, so it also has looser rules like no restriction on riding days or vehicle changes, and you have 2 whole years to complete it. So if this is your first time, I recommend you do the standard version. But if you only plan to do this once and you have the time and money, consider the Ultimate Edition. Planning the route was the part I was most overwhelmed by. So now let's discuss how I did that and the thinking behind it. Well, first you need to decide if you'll do it solo or with companions. I was originally going to go solo, but I realized that it would be more fun with a companion. He could help me shoot and also help push around my heavy bike. And 2 is also safer than 1, especially when you're riding motorcycles. For such a long trip, it's essential that you pick the right travel buddies. Make sure you agree on the most important things like how you eat, your standard of accommodation, and how punctual you are. So I went with my friend and colleague Toby. He and I could both survive on coffee and a single meal in a day. And we were both happy to arrive way ahead of schedule at the ports. The bigger your group, the slower you'll move, but it's also fun. Many loopers also go solo, which gives you the most freedom. I would recommend January to April as the best months to do it. Other times of year have a greater tendency to be both too hot and too rainy, and December is just really busy around the country. Honestly, with climate change, it's really hard to predict the weather. This year, with Super El Nino, has been both sweltering hot and sporadically stormy. The first quarter is still usually your best bet for cooler temperatures and drier weather, at least in the north. In the south, from Quezon Province onwards, I'm not as familiar with the weather patterns. The next step was the most challenging for me. Planning the actual route. And I procrastinated this for months because I needed to decide everything between the checkpoints. That is its beauty, but it left me overwhelmed with all the things that I wanted to see. So to move forward, I had to determine, my goals for the trip. So I decided that I wasn't going to cram all my exploration into one big trip. Instead, I would aim to get a taste of everything along with getting the XP of the ferry crossings. Armed with that, I could decide afterwards for future trips where I would like to go back and explore more. And I figured this would give me the best balance of touring with kind of saving the time and money I had available. And with that decided, I was ready to plan. I used Google My Maps to lay it all out. Being able to visualize the whole route shifted me from feeling overwhelmed to feeling excited. So here's the result with all of the checkpoints laid out. There are 8 town or city checkpoints and 6 required ferry crossings. The Roro, meaning roll on, roll off, ferry trips are the signature feature of the loop. They make up the so-called Philippine Nautical Highway. So the Philippines, in case you didn't know, is an archipelago of 7,641 islands as of the last count. And it stretches about 1,850 kilometers from north to south. My total mileage was 5,483 kilometers minus trips done on non-riding days, and many loopers do a lot more. Now, how do you actually determine the pins since all you get are entire cities and regions? It's really generic. Well, loopers usually aim for the welcome arches with the town's name or tourist signs that are usually in the form of like I love, name of town. Now, this is important because you do need definitive photo evidence that you were at the designated checkpoint. You can find all of the welcome arches pinned on Google Maps except for General Santos City. In Gensan, because the road was widened, they lost their welcome arch. So I looked for the first big sign that was on the way to our pension house. Plotting the ports needs a little more work. There can be more than one port that gets you between each of the required regions. However, I did have a useful constraint in that I was sponsored by FastCat. As such, I only needed to plot the ports that they took off from, which are on their website. So as of May 2026, these are the ports. Alternate ports for other ferry lines can be close by, but sometimes, like in southern Leyte, they're far apart, like on an entire separate peninsula. But anyway, with the entire route laid out, the real planning began. I had to plot the distances between the checkpoints first using Google Maps, so this would give me the estimated riding time. And I always used car times instead of bike times for a built-in buffer. Next, I chose points of interest to visit along the route and added the corresponding riding time for them. With all of this data, I could decide how far we could comfortably ride in one day. For very long rides or days that we arrive late because of ferries, I usually plotted extra rest days or at least shorter rides. Our longest riding day ended up being 500 kilometers, which was Manila to Legazpi to start the South Loop. And then I also had to determine the sequence in which I would tackle the Philippine Loop. Coming from Manila, you must decide whether to go north or south first. For each of those, you need to decide to go either counterclockwise or clockwise. Conventional wisdom when riding from Manila is to start with the south, because the south, with its length and 6 ferries, is more challenging and unfamiliar to most. The North Loop is easier with its expressways, familiar places, and lack of ferries. But I opted to start with the north to make it a tune-up ride, and it proved to be a great decision. We were able to get to know our riding stamina and refine our packing lists and shooting workflow. And then we opted to follow the more commonly taken directions. That is, counterclockwise for the North Luzon Loop and then clockwise for the South Loop. In the end, our trip went according to plan flawlessly. We did the North Loop in 7 straight days with no rest days. And then we did the South Loop in 16 days with 3 full rest days. The final total was 23 days out with 19 riding days. But if you happen to get unlucky with the weather, which can happen anytime, you could get stuck for a day or even more at the ports. And that's why I didn't fill up the itinerary to the brim. So always check the weather forecast before any planned ferry crossing. Now, I need to emphasize that this phase is where you should get creative and really follow your curiosity. Don't just follow what I did, which is frankly a bog standard itinerary with just a few twists. There are countless ways to string together these checkpoints, and my way is by no means definitive. If you can afford to, plan to take proper breaks from riding to both rest and see the sights in each region. I know a Lithuanian gent who did a solo DIY loop on a KLR, and he clocked in a whopping 11,000 kilometers with a lot of off-road and moto camping. In case you're curious, the fastest completion times for Philippine loops are around 10 to 12 days. That is, frankly, not touring, but endurance riding. And I don't recommend this. I mean, you're spending all this time, money, and energy to travel so far, yet you'll see so little and suffer so much. It's still a valid approach, I guess, if that's all the time you have or if you really enjoy endurance riding. But this is not and never has been a competition, and no one cares how fast you do the Philippine Loop. In fact, the real bragging rights belong to the people who visit the most places. Now, a helpful tool I used to plan was this Google Sheet shared by a previous looper, and sorry, bro, I forgot your name, but thanks so much for sharing this with all of us. I basically just duplicated it and customized it. It lays out the trip day by day and tallies distances and money spent. I'll link to a copy of that you can duplicate in the description as well. I'd say the sweet spot would be 3 to 4 weeks, including rest days. That's a good balance between sightseeing, covering distance, and saving money. We averaged 288 kilometers per day doing that, almost never riding after sunset. And note that we were on big, comfortable adventure bikes. If you're riding something less comfortable, you may need to schedule more rest. On that note, let's talk about choosing a vehicle for the Philippine Loop. Based on what I see on Facebook, most Philippine Loopers do it on small displacement motorcycles. So that's not a limiting factor. People do this riding even 2-up on 125s, even smaller, and they also provide significant savings in gas and maintenance. Personally, I think big tourers are just right for the Philippine Loop. There's no unavoidable hard off-road, this isn't FG Moto Mountain Cross, but there are long stretches of rough roads that will shake the fillings out of your teeth. The KLR 650 gobbled all of that up while providing peace of mind with its durability. The KLR's relative slowness also wasn't a hindrance. When you're riding this many days, in my opinion, going fast is a waste of gas and energy. I stuck to riding mostly at 80 kilometers per hour on open roads. If I had to do it again, I would love to do it on something like a Tracer 9 GT or even a BMW 1300 GS. After all, the KLR has gotten me used to wrestling with elephants. But I would also equally love to do it on a 250cc dual sport. And that way, I can just kind of pop into back roads and little trails whenever I feel like it by myself. And I would also love to do it on my Vespa just for the vibes. And of course, you can take a car. It doesn't matter what car as long as it's in good running condition. And that's a good excuse to go see the whole Philippines with your loved ones. And finally, you can bike or even walk. I've seen guys bike the Philippine Loop in the amount of time I took to ride it, which is hardcore AF. Okay, now let's talk about one of the biggest questions, which is budgeting, money. How much money do you need for a Philippine Loop? It depends really on how much time you plan to spend out and what level of comfort you want. My budget went roughly 30% each to food and expenses, to accommodations, and to gas. The remaining went to ferries and various port fees. You'll spend less for bikes under 400cc and for bicycles and spend more for cars. We spent about 17,500 pesos each on gas, and about 75% of that mileage was after the start of this idiotic Iran war, so gas was a lot more expensive. For accommodations, we spent 34,500 pesos for 19 nights in hotels and resorts. 2 nights were in a friend's house and 1 night was in our respective homes. So that's 1,800 pesos or $30 per night on average for 2 people for very decent accommodations. You can spend less, especially if you're game to camp. Just so you know, raw roadside camping here is at your own risk. I wouldn't recommend it or do it myself, but I've seen it done. For the ferries, FastCat sponsored us. Thank you, FastCat. But if we had bought our tickets ourselves, we would have spent 22,514 pesos or $370 each. Add about 500 pesos or $8 for each person for terminal fees at all 6 ports collectively. FastCat basically is the premium option for the ferries, and I prefer to take them whenever possible, even if I have to pay. Their ferries are always clean, fast, and comfortable. Other ferries are cheaper and offer options for ports and schedules that FastCat does not. As far as I can tell, most loopers basically mix and match the ferry lines, taking whatever is the next available ferry. So if you've done this, please share your experience below to share information with us and tell us about your experience on the other ferries. Finally, for food and other expenses, we spent about 25,000 pesos each. That's about 1,000 pesos a day, which is $16. This included a rear tire change worth 10,000 pesos and a new duffel bag worth 3,500 pesos in the middle of the trip. Given the total distance, I think you should include an oil change and a tire change in your budget. And don't forget a contingency fund for breakdowns, ferry strandings, and the like. And all of this takes the running total to about 82,000 pesos or $1,350. Per day, that works out to 3,600 pesos or 60 US dollars. In terms of the range, I would put that on the high side of average. I wasn't trying to save money on food, and big bike tires are expensive. Now factor in new riding gear and farkling out your bike, and the total maybe gets closer to 100,000 pesos or over 1,600 US dollars. You can do it ultra low budget on a small bike for like 50 to 60,000 pesos. Now that may still sound like a lot, but think of it this way. You're traveling across a whole country, literally round trip, and for less than the cost of watching BTS in Madrid. Now, I didn't, but I have friends who did. On a related note, should you pre-book your accommodations and or ferries? Well, it depends on your tolerance for uncertainty. The advantage of not pre-booking is that you can decide in the moment where you want to spend more time. Just be warned that there are stretches with no visible tourist accommodations. I'm not saying that there aren't any, only that you don't really see them from the main road. And these places include Northern Samar, the stretch north after Cotabato City until Lanao del Norte, and Maguindanao del Sur. So if you don't want to pre-book, at least get an idea beforehand of where the major towns or touristic centers are. I personally chose to pre-book all 6 nights of my North Loop before setting out. For the South Loop, I pre-booked 2 to 3 days in advance to allow for changes in plans and for missing ferry crossings. The last thing I want, honestly, after a long day in the saddle is arriving at night and needing to search still for a place to sleep. So pre-booking also lets me lock in a price and guarantee that I can get 2 beds for 2 people. Now, honestly, yes, this does take away some of the spontaneity from the journey, so I don't think it's for everyone. If I were traveling solo, I'd do it more spontaneously since I'm not trying to look for 2 beds. When it comes to the ferries, for motorbikes, it's not really necessary to pre-book because they can kind of just stick you wherever on the deck. For cars, I'm not sure though. It might be a good idea to pre-book to just ensure you have a slot on board, as it's going to fill up quickly with trucks and vans and all that stuff. Most people just seem to arrive early and take whatever ferry is departing next. So if you've done it in a car, please do share your experience because I'm also really curious about how it goes because I'd love to do it one day in my Jimny. Now I want to talk about my experience with safety and road laws, and this is especially for foreigners who don't get how it works here. There will be a temptation, especially on Mindanao's roads, to go over the speed limit. But please avoid this even if most places don't enforce it. Philippine roads are, to put it mildly, wildly unpredictable. Vehicles, pedestrians, dogs, cats, goats routinely cross the road 2 to 8 lanes without warning. If you're a foreigner, you should kind of take it easy and get a sense first of the whole flow, how people ride and drive, and then adapt to that. Strict speed limits are mainly on the toll roads, and these are only found going north and south out of Manila, and they're off limits to all motorcycles below 400cc. I know, it's arbitrary, but that's the rule. It's also enforced on the long straight road going through Tupi and Polomolok in South Cotabato. Aside from that, police checkpoints are common, especially all across Mindanao. You must have your valid driver's license and ORCR ready for inspection anytime. One highway patrol group checkpoint in Ilocos Sur did give us some trouble. They flagged down my companion for having his auxiliary lights on during the day. And you have to settle this ticket in Vigan City, which is a whole day's ride away from Manila. So keep those lights off unless you need them and only at night. That said, the vast majority of my encounters with the police and army checkpoints have been polite and drama-free. They are respectful if you are. And some are even enthusiastic about big bikes and the Philippine Loop. As a rule, in the Philippines, patience, humor, and being nice can go a long, long way. Speaking of Mindanao, the conventional wisdom from locals is to avoid riding at night. And I don't think this is because anything is likely to happen to you. Mindanao is just huge, and there are big swaths of kind of remote mountainous areas here. So it's not really worth the risk, I think, to ride at night and then you suffer an emergency and be far from help. And honestly, this advice would extend to any remote area across the country. But I'll admit, the reality is that there are still armed groups hiding in the countryside in every region. You are extremely unlikely to run into them or even run into trouble with them if you do. But you should still avoid wandering off after dark, especially deep in the mountains. That said, a distinction I want to make is that the Philippines lacks vast wilderness of the kind you get in Australia or the US. On the road, in a vehicle, you're only ever a few hours away from a village or a town. You can feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, but you can still hear loud exhausts in the distance pretty much anywhere. So, all in all, I would just say, ride sensibly, have your wits about you, and be nice, and your Philippine Loop will be drama-free. The only time I felt unsafe was during a rainstorm with lightning close by and flooding in the street. In fact, I was never even concerned about theft from the bike. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to be a concern here the way it is elsewhere, and I hope it stays that way. Alright, that should cover pretty much everything you need to start and more. If you want to know about how I packed and what my gear loadout was, I'll cover that in the next video. But to round out the discussion for this video, I'll give my review of the whole experience. To be honest, coming from the adventure riding community, I thought the Philippine Loop would be a piece of cake. I mean, there's no trails required, and people of all experience levels complete the Philippine Loop. But what I realized is that 23 days of travel through mostly unknown territory is a bit tiring, not to mention expensive. What I'm saying is, it may not be for everyone. Endurance isn't the goal, but in a sense, it's required. I have traveled and been away from home for much longer stretches, but needing to reach far north and then south and then riding back every kilometer, it hits different. You don't just get to fly home after getting to the furthest point. So what I'm saying is the base experience of it, the most basic version of the Philippine Loop that you could do is still a challenge just due to the sheer distance. And your loop can be as easy or as hardcore as you like. And all of that makes it a worthy and fulfilling quest that you can pretty much tailor to your level of adventurousness. In the end, finishing the Philippine Loop did feel earned. But maybe the more important question is, did I enjoy it? Would I do it again? And what would I do differently? Well, for what I set out to do, I'd say it was a resounding success. 100% worth the trouble. The best part for me was not a single place. It was the daily discoveries that all added up to a real sense of the size and diversity of the country. Long distance travel on the ground restores a sense of scale and wonder that air travel takes away from you. It makes you more respectful and awestruck that you can see so much of this world, knowing as little as I do about how to adventure. And it makes you grateful that you live in a time where almost anyone can do it. The worst part, if you ask me, it was the ports. And I don't want this to discourage you because thousands of people ride these ferries every day. But the procedures and bureaucracy are all over the place. And you just have to be armed with a lot of patience and a bit of resourcefulness. So for now, while things are the way they are, treat this and the very real possibility of weather canceling your ferry trip as part of the adventure. But also, doing this taught me something about myself. That at my age, I'm 41, where I am in life, and with the amount I've already traveled in this world, I'm no longer greedy for experience. There were days that I frankly felt homesick and I didn't feel like exploring more. And you know what? I was okay with that. Sabihin mo ng baduy, pero ganun okay lang. But now I know that I'd rather spend 3 days to a week exploring specific areas, and then I can go home and process that experience, and then rest and get excited for the next one. And I would prefer that to investing a month of my life cramming it all into one big honking epic trip. Do I regret not visiting certain places while I was there after I got home and looked back at my trip? Of course. But I was tired in the moment, and I knew I had a lot more riding ahead of me every day. So I optimized for enjoyment more than getting the maximum amount of content. Because if I'm enjoying myself, then that feeling translates to my mood, and that should show up in my videos. What I'm saying is, I wouldn't do the standard Philippine Loop again. Unless it's for a sponsor who has a novel mission for me to fulfill. I've done it, and I'm good. Without that, it's a bit too much time and money to just repeat. It would retread too much ground. But I would 100% do the ultimate Philippine Loop because what a quest that would be. I'd need to find sponsors and or save up a significant amount of time and money for it. That distance of 9,000 kilometers is basically the equivalent of a transcontinental journey. So just imagine like the feeling of achievement of getting that done. Which leads me to my final question: should you do the Philippine Loop? Let me first address my fellow Filipinos. I realize now the great appeal of the Philippine Loop. It's this big, bucket list worthy adventure, but it's doable for any regular person. It requires no special skill, only desire, time, and the vehicle you trust. Getting to know so much more of your home country will change your perspective for good. You'll never watch the news from across the nation in the same way again. You will have been to these places and they'll be real to you. And you'll never talk about the Philippines the same way again because you're talking about first-hand knowledge now. And remember too, you're only a local where you're from. When I go to other regions, oftentimes I don't even speak the same language. So traveling here with the attitude of a visitor makes it as fulfilling as any travel to any foreign country. Now for foreigners, I'd sell you the Philippine Loop as a unique, sizable, but not extreme challenge. Along the way, you'll find abundant natural beauty and lots of local color. You'll experience the highs and lows of the chaos and informality that define this part of the world. And you'll meet some of the nicest people, if I do say so myself. As long as you show us respect without condescension, have a sense of humor, and an appetite. And don't forget to smile often. Furthermore, almost all Filipinos speak at least a little English. Prices may be higher than our neighbors, but still accessible. On top of that, the Philippine Loop is little known outside the country. The Philippines, I think, remains one of Southeast Asia's most underrated and perhaps misunderstood destinations. And that's it. Thank you for watching part 1 of my Philippine Loop guide. I know this was long, but my goal was to kind of make the definitive English language reference for it. I'm sure I missed a few things, so let me know in the comments if you have any questions or your own experience to share that can add to all the information we've shared here. So up next is part 2, where I discuss how I packed for the trip, including riding gear and camera gear. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace and mabuhay!